Tonight we start reading Kenny and the Dragon. Before I forget, many years ago, hold on, I know what you are thinking. You're thinking a book about a dragon should start with Once Upon a Time. But this one doesn't, because frankly, I don't really know what Once Upon a Time means. Now, I was once upon a horse, and that was fun. Also, I was once upon a night galloping on a horse, but that's another story altogether. So instead, let me start our tale with this. Once upon a farm, in a town just west from yours, and on a Wednesday many years ago, a rabbit farmer, his wife, and their son Kenneth were preparing to sit down to supper. Now, Kenneth seems a little formal for a boy's name, doesn't it? No kid would say, Kenneth, can I borrow a pencil? No, they'd say Ken or Kenny, can I borrow a pencil? And no doubt our Kenny would not even notice when they swiped it from his school desk. For you see, Kenny always had his head buried in a book. And he loved to read all sorts of subjects: science, mysteries, histories, and even fairy tales. In fact, fairy tales and natural history were his two favourite topics. And as far as Kenny was concerned, both hold the same merit in the real world. So it is not surprising that he enjoyed going to school. He always asked compelling questions, always did his homework, complete with footnotes and bibliography, and always had fantastic notions about what he wanted to do when he grew up. One day he'd want to be an astronaut and meet extraterrestrials from a distant planet. The next he'd decide on a jungle explorer looking for living dinosaurs. Or he'd build a submersible that could go deep into the ocean to find underwater cities. Each day it was something new. That kid has such an imagination, his English teacher would say. His identification of local flora and fauna is quite impressive, his science teacher would say. Kenny Rabbit, he's kind of out there, his classmates would say. And to a certain degree they were right. You see, like them, Kenny grew up on a farm, and both his mother and father were farmers. They came from generations of farmers who grew vegetables and raised livestock. So his parents, like most of his neighbours, really didn't have time to read books. They were just too busy tending the farm. You can't harvest corn with a book, his mum would say. No bookie book's going to bring you the sheep in at sundown, his dad would say. Regardless of what they thought, though, his parents did their very best to support Kenny in all that he did, right down to listening to his lengthy theories on this and that over dinner. You see, Kenny would tell them, it's going to rain because cold air and warm air collide in the upper atmosphere. This creates thunder and it causes the moisture within the cumulus clouds to fall. Oh, I thought it was going to rain because the cows are laying down, his dad would reply. And most folks in town would have agreed with Kenny's dad. Hold on a second. What was the name of that town? I can't believe I've forgotten. It was near water, if I recall correctly. Dunhill? No, that's in the northern province. Meadow Falls? It's not that either. But it was a stream or river. Round Brook? Yes, that's it. The town was sort of roundish in layout with a brook running through the middle of it. Goodness, I can't believe I'd almost forgotten. Not something a fellow in my position should allow. All right then. So, in the little farming town of Round Brook, Kenny lived with his parents, went to school, did his chores on the farm, and filled the rest of his time reading, which is precisely where we find him at the beginning of our tale. go. The Devil's Scourge. Kenny's father burst into the kitchen, panting heavily. His ears twitched. It was supper time, and Kenny's mum was making her family's favourite, corn chowder. The soup's heavy aroma swirled about as the farmer moved through the room. "Pack all your things, we're out of here. We're moving," Kenny's dad hollered. He was a scraggly, hairy fellow wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and he was trying to catch his breath as if he'd been running. "Moving? Not now, mister," Kenny's mum replied. "The corn's not boiling yet, the broth isn't quite right, and I still have to sew the patches on Kenneth's trousers for school tomorrow." Kenny's dad paused, walked to the stove, dipped a finger in the pot, and agreed it still wasn't quite right. "Get your dirty paws out of my chowder. Wash your hands, have some milk, and tell me what's got you so riled up." She ground a little pepper into her broth. Unlike Kenny's father, she was soft, round, huggable, and seemed to always be adorned in an apron with a spoon in hand. Kenny's dad did as he was told. Then he stroked his ears and started. "This afternoon my eyes saw something I wish they'd never seen. I went to shepherd home the flock up on top of Shepherd's Hill, where they had been a-grazing all day. As soon as I got there, I sees the sheep all huddled and quiet on the far side of the hilltop, and I think to myself, what in the world has got 'em so spooked? So I wander over to the other side of the hill, you know where them rocks and boulders are. Taste this, better? Oh, yes, so much better. So I, hold on, dear. Kenneth, get out here and set the table." The wooden floorboards creaked as Kenny shuffled into the kitchen, his head buried in his book. He was reading a story about a giant written by a man named Oscar. Without looking up, the small, skinny lad opened the cupboard and grabbed plates to place on the table. "Not plates, bowls, Kenneth. I told you earlier we're having corn chowder tonight. Get your head out of the clouds. Put down the book for a minute and set the table properly." His mum snatched the book out of his paws and set it on the counter. The wooden counter was dinged, scratched and stained from years of use. Pots and pans hung from the ceiling right above where Kenny's mum was cooking. She reached over and opened one of the numerous round windows to allow the cool country air into the kitchen. "Don't you want to hear the rest of my story?" Kenny's dad whimpered through his milk moustache. "Of course, dear, of course. What did you find in the rocks?" his mum said, as she tasted the soup. "So there I am, climbing up on them big rocks and boulders. All the while I'm thinking there must be a wolf, a lion or a bear hiding in there. Remember I said I heard those weird whooshing sounds coming from the hill last week?" Kenny folded the napkins and placed them around the banged-up wooden table. "I remember that," he said. "I thought—" "Hold on, son, hold on," his dad interrupted, waving his hands about. "So I make some noises of my own to see if I can spook it off, and that's when I saw it." Kenny stopped setting the table and looked up. "Saw what?" The gears in the lad's brain began to turn. He realised his father's tale involved some sort of encounter with a carnivorous animal. Kenny figured he could determine just what his dad had seen based on the description. A lion was out of the question. They were too far east for lions. Wolves usually travelled in packs and were rarely seen in these parts, but bears did prefer rocky outcroppings and caves. "Well, first I smell something burning, not wood, but something smoky like. Then I see a pair of glowing eyes, and then a head as big as this here table peers out from an opening in the side of the hill, and it's covered in horns and scales and a fur like a crocodile." "You mean alligator?" Kenny corrected him, though he wondered what sort of alligator had horns and fur. "Exactly, but have you ever seen a blue alligator with a neck like a turkey and a body like one of them giant lizardy things in your books?" "You mean dinosaurs, Dad? Those really did exist, you know. Scientists have even found their bones in old—" "No, son, this wasn't one of them Brontosaurus rexes." His father looked him in the eyes. "It was like one of them flying things that eats pretty maidens and burns castles to the ground." Kenny paused for a moment. "It can't be," he said to himself. "It couldn't be." He put the last of the silverware in its place on the table. His father just sat there staring at him with his big eyes. Glancing over at his mother, Kenny noticed she had stopped cooking and was looking at them quietly while holding the ladle. He turned back to his father. "Dad, are you talking about a dragon?" "Yes, son, I'm talking about one of them dragons. He started pacing around the kitchen, waving his arms wildly. It's taken up residence on the side of Shepherd's Hill, and we got to sell the farm and move before that devil, that scourge, comes down and burns everything right to the ground.